Okay, perfect. I discovered that
Yeah,
I enjoy more the interview in this way. People enjoy more the interview in this way.
I can believe that.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, I'm in Rome. I'm close to Rome. I live close to Rome,
Yeah.
and
And you see people, you have consulting rooms in Rome, or where do you see people?
I see people in Rome and close to Rome. I have two studios, two offices, and as psychologist, the lockdown was we were allowed to see people face to face, but I
Yeah,
prefer to see them online. But in the
yeah,
last 3 weeks, I start again to see them face to face, even if
yeah.
this lockdown unlock the online therapy for many people. You know what I mean? People
I mean, it's
that.
interesting because I think we're a long way from being able to see clients or to see patients.
Yeah,
And I think our work is going to move substantially
yeah,
online.
yeah,
And in all honesty, I think this is a moment when, well, for training, I think it's a sea change really for training.
yeah,
And I think I would say in future, the greater part of my training work is going to end up online.
yeah.
So I think there's going to be much less face-to-face training from now on.
I think so. I think the same. Consider that my girlfriend, she's a dance teacher, and dance, is something that you could think that it's impossible to do online, but it's not true. Many people, also great dancer like Roberto Bolle, did a lot of training online. Actually, while we are talking, she is about to starting a intensive week of
Okay.
training. She will not teach. She will have lesson,
Okay.
and in a contemporary dance, which
Okay.
it's strange, and it's in a way related to our topic because for many years, so many decades, we think that one thing is that thing, and that thing could be done only in that way.
Yeah.
Then something happened,
I know.
like World War
I agree with
Two.
that. And suddenly you realise it could have been done differently. I mean, thinking about it now, for some time I've been saying we should move our training online,
Hmm.
partly because I felt, well, yeah, guilty at some level about the amount of flying. My carbon emission
Yeah.
each year was in some ways ridiculously high, and I would try and do all sorts of things about it. But I was flying a lot,
Hmm.
and I was thinking for quite a long time, we have to stop this. This has to stop. We need to move online. We don't need to be doing this. And there was always a reason not to make the change. And now suddenly this happens, and we have to make the change,
Yeah.
and it will happen. And it's something that I've been thinking about. Oddly enough, we had an invitation today to go to Vietnam to do some teaching,
Hmm.
to go to Ho Chi Minh City, and there was a little bit of me that was thinking, oh, that would be quite nice. That would be quite interesting going to Vietnam. And then I thought, no, let's offer them an online course.
Yeah.
See if we can do it online. Yeah.
Is there is there uh, a moment in brief history, your institute, your and Chris and Harvey
Yeah.
Institute, in which you had this kind of switch and you started to do things in the way that you do it now, about your model of solution focus, or I don't know. I think I presume that is something more. It was something more gradual, but even in gradual process, there is sometimes haha moment, you know, an insight
Yeah.
or a switching point.
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, this is asking us to look back a long way, really.
Mm.
I mean, the team, we started working together using Solution Focus in 1987. And in 1987, look, as you know, Solution Focus was very much an exception-based model. And exceptions, the idea that problems didn't happen all the time, that people came with solutions, that was completely central. And the picturing or describing of the preferred future was secondary in the approach. Steve Shazer used to say that actually he asked about the preferred future only or merely to work out which exceptions were relevant. Like the word he used to use was salient. Which exceptions were salient? And so the preferred future, the picturing of it, was actually very much there in order to support the usefulness of the exceptions. And when you looked at Steve's work in the early days, his describing of the preferred future was very, I mean, we would call it broad brush. There wasn't much detail. There wasn't much fine detail in the descriptions. And quite why we began to do it differently, I'm not quite sure. Chris Iverson says, that it was because he misunderstood what Steve wanted, that he thought, that Steve wanted, as we read Steve's work, that he wanted a much more detailed picturing of it. And so we began to invite people into much, much more detailed descriptions. And as we did that, I suppose what began to happen was the place of exceptions and the place of the preferred future, they switched place. So suddenly, the picturing of the preferred future began to appear to us much more central and much more significant. And just inviting people to describe the futures that they wanted in detail, it became clear to us that just doing that itself made a difference. It was, if you like, therapeutic. It made a difference just doing them. And that was, I think, one of the big changes in our work. Obviously, the other one was moving away from Steve DeShazer's traditional starting point, which he would ask people, what brings you here? Which pretty well always would take people into a problem description. It's my depression, it's my anxiety, it's my drinking, whatever it was. And moving towards a more solution-focused starting. And in the end, we ended up with this question, so what are your best hopes when we're talking together? And look, I can't actually remember which came first, but the two things were very connected. The way that the preferred future, the picture of the preferred future became central, and the moving away from what brings you here to, so what are your best hopes when we're talking together? And look, one of the things that Steve writes about, and he writes about it in his third book, Clues, the phrase he uses is straightening the line. He says, if people want to get from A to B, it's our job to find the straightest line. And I guess at Brief, we got really, really interested in this idea of straightening the line. And obviously asking people what brings you here actually takes you on a diversion into the problem. So we thought, well, that's not a very straight line. And, of course, the whole idea of exceptions, that didn't seem very much of a straight line either. In the sense that exceptions are exceptions to the rule of the problem. So you actually have to know what the problem is in order to be able to establish the exceptions. Yeah. And so we came up with this phrase, this word, instances, little bits of the preferred future. that actually are in place or people are already doing. And what we then had was a straight line. And all of these things, they were very much interwoven. And very hard for me to say when it started. Very hard for me to say that. But somewhere, I would say between 1995, 96, 97, 98, 99, our picturing of the approach really changed radically. Really changed radically.
I think I read in your blog that you maintain, I'm sorry if I misunderstood, you maintain the word solution-focused brief therapy to honor it in Zuckerberg and Sid Shazer, of course, and of course because there are a lot of point of connection, but if I remember well, you say something like it's not anymore solution focused, because if you talk about solution, there is a problem that you have talked about before, and in fact it's very interesting because when people here in Italy approach to solution focus brief therapy, they people, I mean psychologists, therapists, they often think that it's how to say an approach that developed the solution to the problem, or that helped the client to describe the solution, and it's not that. It's more to how can we say that to I don't know, a preferred feature-oriented brief therapy.
Look, Flavio, I agree with that. I mean, I think that if you wanted to do, if you were setting up a new model now, and it, people did what we do, then a better name would be something like outcome-oriented therapy. Outcome-oriented, probably. But I do think that if you look at Steve Chazer's writings, everything that we've done can be found in his writings. Much less in what he actually did. Because one of the interesting things about de Chazer was what he wrote about and what he did were not the same. And so Chris Harvey and I began to get very, very interested in what he wrote about, and began to think to ourselves, if you took what he wrote about seriously, what sort of model would you end up with? And I think what you'd end up with is, look, something similar to what we do now. And you're right, I mean, the word solution doesn't work for us, because you can't have a solution without a problem. So immediately you use the word solution, you are bringing the other side of that distinction into your thinking. If you've got a solution, you have to have a problem. And we're working quite hard at some level to invite people to focus on an outcome and not to have to bring the problem in their thinking into the conversation. Look, it may still be there, in the shadows somewhere, in the background of the work we do. In fact, I think it probably is. But in terms of the work, we're not inviting people to bring it in. And the name is not a good name. The name is not a good name. But on the other hand, I feel a huge debt of gratitude to the work of Steve Chazer and Zuckerberg. Steve was very much our mentor at Brief. We saw him every year, at least once every year, between 1990 and the year that he died. And I can see a tradition. And I think I still operate within that tradition. Whether people will continue making that decision into the future and still call it solution-focused brief therapy, I don't know. I don't know. We'll see.
I think that I literally love solution focus. I love your approach. I have to confess that I feel lucky to have been trained in brief approach to solution focus. It completely fit with my love with minimalism, with to do just with to start with the idea to do the how much less is possible, and then you can always increase.
And look, Flavio, even there, I think we're honouring Steve D'Souza. You know, what he was interested in was both minimalism and simplicity.
Yeah.
What is the least that you need to do that's associated nonetheless with a good outcome? And anything additional that you do from that point of view is actually not justifiable. Why would you do things that aren't necessary? And so our experience of solution focus has actually been an experience of cutting things out. You know, in the very early days, Chris Harvey and I, we worked in a terribly interesting, very innovative, very creative mental health clinic in London. It was systemically oriented. And look, it was also very, very problem focused. And we were trying to use these new ideas from solution focus. And so every time I met a new client, it was almost like I had to make a gear change. You know, I came out of this very problem-focused clinic, and now I was trying to step into a solution-focused conversation. A very different way of thinking, a very different way of approaching people. And in order to help me to make that shift, what we began to introduce into solution focus was something we called problem-free talk. So we would connect with people in a context of possibility, of strength, of competence, rather than connecting with them in their problem. So rather than starting with what brings you here, we would start with, so how do you like to spend your time? And as I talked with people, I'd be interested in their strengths, their skills, their competencies, their talents, their abilities, all of that, and inviting people to focus on that. And then I would go into the work. And what we realized was, after we'd been doing that for a while, and this became so embedded as our way of thinking that I didn't need to do it anymore, this is just the way I thought, that actually we realized we were doing it for ourselves rather than doing it for the client. And the client didn't need us to do that. We could just walk into the room and ask them, so what are your best hopes for talking together? And we could start work. Because in solution focus, you can't start work until you have a starting point for the conversation. That's a better way of putting it. And the best hopes gives you a starting point for the conversation. So in that sense, we've been interested in minimalizing and making simpler. And just as we changed the beginning of a session, we also changed the endings. Taking a break, having a team discussion, compliments, bridging the statement, tasks or homework. We've begun to realize that none of that is necessary. And if it's not necessary, the question is, do you have any justification for doing something that doesn't actually make a difference to the client?
How is I have to find the right words. How is working solution focus in the world, I would say, or in England, in UK, in the university. I mean, here, in Italy, today is barely unknown. We must be grateful to the guys in Florence. Me and my team, we're doing a lot of work to spread it around, and there are few other people who are talking about solution focus. But in the university and psychology faculties or other faculties, is And no, nobody's talking about that. And this is a problem because solution focus as an epistemology, a philosophy that is connected to postmodernism, to post-structuralism, which is something that, at least here in Italy, is not so spread. It's not so
Yeah,
so tough,
yeah,
so much. How is
yeah,
in your
yeah.
country?
Well, um, I think I think we're in transition
Oh yeah.
in some ways. Um, and I think that the spread of the approach is both a good thing and it has difficulties attached to it. What we're seeing, I think, is that the approach is growing predominantly in the world of public health services, public services,
Yeah.
welfare, social care, public health, mental health, and is spreading much less in the world of private psychotherapy.
Why?
I think that the model is, to some extent, inconvenient
Okay.
for private therapists. To the extent that, look, you know, we say to people when they come, we'll see you for as long as it takes. You'll tell us when you're ready to end. And typically, we see people either 3, 4, or 5 times. I mean, currently I'm working on the basis of potentially repeatable single consultations.
Mm-hmm.
So I make an appointment with someone, I see them, and I say, look, if you want another consultation, just email me and we can make another time. So I'm working on that basis currently. Now, that's fine for me. But if your income depends on private psychotherapy, then it's incredibly frightening to move into a world where you see people 3, 4, 5 times. It's much more secure to have clients who come much more often than that, because then your income is much more secure.
Yeah.
And so I think it's actually quite frightening in that way. Now, the extent to which private psychotherapy is being led into solution focus is when people are taking on part-time jobs and contracts. So people who've got their own private practice, but who maybe work in a doctor's surgery. And in the doctor's surgery, they spend 2 sessions there, 2 mornings a week. And in the surgery, they're only allowed 6 sessions. And suddenly they begin to think, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to do something else because I need a model that's going to work in 6 sessions. Or people who work in employee assistance programs, EAPs, where firms buy into services to support their employees, where they're allowed, again, very often 6 sessions. Or people who work in university departments supporting students and supporting members of staff, and there again, very often it's a 6-session model. But look, solution focus has actually moved quite slowly into private psychotherapy. Now, where it has expanded quickly is in the world where there's too much demand and not enough supply. Social work, mental health, psychiatry, child psychiatry, more than adult really. But in those worlds. And what we're now seeing are people who are training as psychiatric nurses, for example, people who are training as social workers, people who are training as psychologists to some extent, all being exposed to solution focus on their trainings. Very often they get a half day on solution focus, maybe 1 lecture. And what I've noticed is that the half day on the lecture is very often given by someone who's not actually a practicing solution-focused brief therapist.
Nice.
So the risk is, I would say, look, I don't want to be rude, but the lectures are given by people who actually don't understand the approach. And the version of solution focus that people are getting is in some senses I would say, quite a crude version.
Yeah.
Sometimes quite an old-fashioned version of the approach. And so you have people coming and saying, I've never liked solution focus because, and then they give you a heap of reasons,
Yeah.
all things that I would never actually do, that I would never actually do in my work.
It's also,
so
yeah.
We're seeing an expansion, but the question is whether that expansion is good for our field or not. And I'm not sure.
It's also interesting that in my personal experience here in Italy, not about solution focus, because here, as I say, are relative unknown, but more and more people, more and more clients are asking for brief therapy because it's brief, so it could be convenient for the psychologist, therapist's point of view, but not from the client's point of view.
I think that's right. And I think it's growing here too. I mean, interestingly, in one of the, not popular, but reasonably well-read UK newspapers, there was an article on solution focus on Saturday.
Yeah.
And that's unusual. But it is beginning to happen.
Yeah.
And the idea of a brief therapy, I think, is developing. And I think that actually, in some senses, it fits the changing culture set of ideas. Because I think that people are becoming less, the word I would use is less diffident.
Less?
So, in the past, I think there was a lot of respect for professionals.
Oh, yeah.
The doctor told me to do this, so I have to do this. If the doctor keeps you waiting for 2 hours outside, that was okay, because the doctor's time is precious in some senses. Whereas I think now people are challenging that view increasingly, and are increasingly challenging the idea that the doctor or the expert or the specialist is always right.
Mm-hmm.
And solution focus, I think, begins to change the relationship between the professional and the client, and actually in many ways centres the client's thinking. My thinking is important too, but it centres the client's thinking. And I think in some ways that increasingly fits the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist, in that sense. I think it fits that spirit of the times. So I do see brief therapy as having a very, very strong future, actually.
Yeah.
It is happening, and it will happen.
We are living in a more, I totally agree, we're living in a more, how to say, horizontal roles, not vertical. So, listen, Heaven, coming back to practice of solution focus, what is your personal, how to say in English, your personal, most important challenge when you practice solution focus? What is more challenging for you?
Goodness. To say there's one, is probably too complimentary to me. there are a number of things I think I struggle with each and every time I see people. Well, one is just, I suppose, disciplining my listening.
Oh.
And even after more than 30 years of doing this, I can still have thoughts when I'm working with someone that are unhelpful to the process. And I have to absolutely notice that and discipline myself. So thoughts can come into my head that come from my old expert world rather than come from listening to the person I'm sitting with. And the challenge for me is absolutely to notice that and to say, gosh, interesting idea, and not useful for solution focus. I'll put that aside and carry on listening. So I think that's still one challenge. And another challenge is truly trusting the process. Truly trusting the process. You know, I sometimes think I meet people who arrive and who are very, nowadays I see them over Zoom, but who are very distressed. You know, life is very tough for them. And every now and again I can have the thought, is this all I'm going to do? You know, I'm going to find out what they want. I'm going to invite them to describe the future that contains their best hopes. I'm going to invite them to be curious about and to notice the things that they're already doing that fit with that. Is that it?
Yeah.
Is that all? And I have to remind myself, I say, yup, that's what I do. It seems to work. Get on with it.
Yeah.
And so listening to the client rather than to the expert dialogue in my head, truly trusting the model, and trusting the client.
Yeah.
You know, that actually if I can talk well enough, if I can invite people effectively enough into describing their life in this way, that people really can change themselves.
Yeah.
They really can do that. They can make changes. Changes will emerge. That's a better way of putting it. Changes will emerge in the talking if I can be, I suppose, effective enough in inviting them into these sorts of descriptions. What do they want? The life that contains that those best hopes, what they're doing that fits with it. And so, you know, even after 33 years of doing this, you know, I still have to work at it. I still have to discipline myself in that way.
It's hard. It's very hard. I agree because I think partially because we've been tough to be the expert, and it's also because probably, I don't know, I'm just thinking, because being solution focused, it's a totally changing of mind, not only in therapy, but considering that people can find their solution, considering that their solution, their way to see. I don't have the words to say that. Considering that even for very difficult mental health problems could be enough, I say, asking people to describe their preferred future or what is working now or what will work when they will be just one small step up. It seems it's not enough. You need to do some very complicated stuff. What is complicated is the theory. The theory.
I know. I mean, what's interesting for me as a solution-focused practitioner is that, someone could come along and maybe they're hearing voices that bother them. Someone else can come along who struggles to get out of bed or to open the door or to answer the phone or all sorts of things. Or, someone who is drinking more than is good for them or using drugs in a way that, isn't helping them as they would see it, or effectively disciplining their eating to a point that they're threatening their life by doing that. But when you ask people to describe the life that they want, their lives are always terribly similar.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would be almost impossible to tell whether this person's come to see me because they're hearing voices, or whether this person's come to see me because they're starving themselves at some level. The life that they want to build is very similar. And so from a solution-focused point of view, the work's the same.
Yeah.
From that point of view. Obviously, if you bring a problem-centered way of working, the work would be hugely different. Working with someone who's been diagnosed as anorexic and someone else who's been diagnosed as psychotic, for example, you'd be expecting to work terribly differently.
Yeah.
And in solution focus, you don't. When Steve DeShoza was asked time and time again, Steve, how do you use solution focus with people who are bipolar? And he would always say, it's the same.
It's the same.
How do you use it with people who've been bereaved? Well, it's the same. How do you use it with people who've been sexually abused? It's the same. So the process of constructing or talking with people in such a way that the new lives that they want emerge from talking is the same. And it doesn't really matter what people come with. That's hard to take on too. That's hard to take on board, I think.
Can you resist? There is this when I came to do the first training at Breve, the last 3 days you were the trainer, but the first day was Chris. And I remember at the end of the day, or probably at the end of the, I don't know, let's say at the end of the day, I went to Chris and I say, so Chris, I've understood. So please tell me if I'm right. And explain my theory. So solution focus work in this way because this led to that, and this, you have to do that. And Chris look at me and ask him, is that right? Is this the way it works? And Chris look at me and say, I don't know. Can you resist to having a theory, to create a theory? Because this is actually a very interesting point, because Steve DeShoza said, like besides the theory, because I think that he said that because he wanted to say theory is a framework, a frame. The risk is that you remain in that frame and that you are not able to go out from that frame when you need that. But of course you always have a theory to follow. You can't have a theory, you just can be not aware of what theory are you following. So what do you think about that? It's hard to not giving an explanation.
Look, Flavio, I think it's interesting. Steve, you're absolutely right. Steve, when he was asked what's the theory in solution focus, he would respond by saying there's no theory. And so when people then would say, well, what is solution focus then? Steve would say it's a description. It's a description of a way of interacting with clients that's associated with clients changing. All right. And so it starts, in his view, as a description, and then implicitly becomes a proposition. At Brief in Milwaukee, this is what we do. Our clients seem to change. You try it. It might change for you. It might work for your clients. Your clients might change. So he said it was a description and there was no theory. But if you read Steve's books, they're full of theory. They're full of theory. And, you could see less theory in his first two solution focus books, Keys and Clues. But when he moves on to putting difference to work, you begin to see much more theory coming into it. And when then you read his fourth solution focus book, his fifth book, Words Were Originally Magic, it's a very difficult book. And it's a very difficult book, which I've read a number of times. I don't find it easy. I still don't. And it's difficult because the theory is difficult. And he's moved into a world of Wittgensteinian philosophy, of language games, of social constructionism, all of that. And it's not easy stuff.
Yeah.
But the question I have is, do you need to know all that stuff in order to be a really effective solution-focused practitioner? And my view is you don't. I don't think you need to know anything about Wittgenstein. I don't think you need to know anything about Derrida and social constructionism and all of that in order to be a really effective solution-focused practitioner. So the way I would see it is the theory is, as it were, a bolt-on, something you add on to the model, but it is not necessary. Now, I also think that it's virtually impossible for people to have no theory.
Yeah.
I just think we human beings, we generate little theories of some sort or another. And I think current in solution focus, there are a number of different little theories.
Yeah.
And the little theory you have actually influences the way you use the approach. So some people have stayed quite close to Duchesne's initial thinking, which was essentially strategic. That, if you want to put it at its simplest, that behavior is patterned, that problems live within patterns of behavior, that if you change the pattern, as soon as you change the pattern, you have the possibility of other things changing. There's a terribly simple, minimal little theory, something about the patterning of behavior, if you like. And then other people, I think, move to more of a sort of narrative sort of idea about what's going on. That as human beings, we story our experiences, we construct narratives. And the narrative I construct out of the raw material of my lived life isn't just a description, but at some level it becomes something of a prescription in terms of what's possible. So the way I construct my narrative is both a way of understanding what's going on, but very much influences the future. And you hear lots of people who actually, when you ask them to talk about their ideas about change, they come up with something that in essence is narrative at its heart. And I think there are a number of others. There are other people who will tell me, this solution-focused stuff, it's all about self-esteem, isn't it? Well, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah.
Maybe it is for you.
Yeah.
Actually, it isn't for me, but maybe it is for you. And if you have that idea it's about self-esteem, then actually it's going to influence the questions you ask and how you ask them. You you're actually going to listen differently. You're going to listen to your different client differently. So I think that it's absolutely inevitable that we're going to have theories. I think human beings are theorizers. That's what we do. And I think it's quite useful to be aware of your theory, so that you're not unknowingly theorizing in your work. So you need to be aware of it. And I would say that you need to hold it lightly, rather than over-believing it. It is just an idea. It's just one way of explaining things. Who knows if it's true at that level? Maybe not. Some contexts it's useful and some it's not. But everyone, I don't believe anyone who says they have no theory of change. I don't believe it.
It's impossible. That's a theory, probably. Listen, usually my interviews last 30 minutes. We're at minute 45. It's okay. And I have the last question because it's the question I always ask at the end of the interview. So I wanted to continue for other 45 minutes, but it's impossible. Maybe another interview, part 2. So my last question is, suppose that tomorrow, suppose that tomorrow you will see a therapist, and you want to give him or her a suggestion to an exercise that he or she can practice in his common day life to improve a skill that they can use during their work with clients. What will be the skill, what will be the exercise you will suggest them?
Goodness. Okay. Obviously there are potentially a number. But one that I think is worth practicing is an exercise that would help us to learn how to stay very, very close to the client's position. And so we could ask the person a question. They could say, what are you both hopes for talking together? And they answer. And every question we ask needs to take account of the client's last answer. So it needs to build on the client's last answer. So if the person says, I'd be happier, you'd say, so how do you know that you are happier? Well, maybe I'd have a little bit more energy and I'd like myself more. And if you found that you were to have a little bit more energy and you liked yourself more, what difference would that make? Well, I'd do more and I'd get more done. At the moment, it's so hard to get stuff done. And if you found that you were able to get stuff done, what would particularly please? And on you go. So just always building your questions on something that the client has just said. I think that the core skills of solution focus are conversational skills, and a core element of conversation is listening and building on what people have just said. And I think that's a really, really useful, just little skill to practice. You can do it with a colleague. So you can ask a colleague a question, and you go 10 minutes one way, and then you reverse roles and do 10 minutes the other way. All the time, building, and trying not to put any words in that aren't necessary for the question. So you're working with the client's words all the time, apart from the ones that are necessary for your question. And if you were happier and more confident, of course you put in, and if you were. But the happier and more confident comes from the client. So just practicing staying really, really, really close.
I love that.
That's an idea.
Yeah, I love that. it's something that I love, and I probably will suggest to my students because it's something that you can practice also in your everyday life. Okay,
Yeah.
Heaven, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this interview. I hope to see you soon, and in person, of course. Please say hello to Chris and Harvey. And
I will. And let me just say that
yeah,
it is a huge pleasure to me to see Solution Focus appearing in Italy.
yeah,
Because I know you know that my mother's family was from Italy. And I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. And I've had family members who talk to me about therapy, and they have no idea of Solution Focus in Italy. And it is just lovely to see la terapia centrata sulla soluzione turning up
yeah.
in Italy. I love it. I love that. And so I'm very, very happy to talk with you, Flavio.
I think it will spread very quick. I hope to have you here in Italy, you, Chris, and Harvey, soon to take some classes. Yeah, to
One day,
yeah, yeah, of
when
course.
when we're allowed out of the UK.
Yeah. Thank you, Heaven.
Flavio, pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I stop this.
Is that okay?
Yeah, and just a second. I see there.
Stop the recording.
Church. Audio. Okay.
Will you edit it? How do you